Let's continue in these fundamentals, in this review of these fundamentals for the Sunni intellectual. And we started talking about the causes of knowledge. And as you already know, there are, yani, how many causes of knowledge? Who can tell us? How many causes of knowledge? 3. That's correct. Barakallahu feekum. So, like you know, there's 3 causes of knowledge: sound senses, accurate news or truthful information if you want, and the intellect. So we talked about sound senses last time. And we started talking about accurate news, and that's where we are now in our review. And then we'll move on, inshallah ta'ala, to talk about intellect, if Allah enables us. So we said that accurate news is of 2 types: tawatur, successive mass narration, and hearing directly from a miracle wielding prophet. So we want to talk about the first one first. Tawatur. Tawatur is an attribute of some news. So if some news has this attribute called tawatur, then this news is called or is described as mutawatir. So if you're not clear, tawatur is the attribute. The attribute. Tawatur is the attribute. And mutawatir is the descriptive name. So any news that has the attribute of tawatur is described as mutawatir. And tawatur cannot possibly be false. In fact, it promotes necessary knowledge. What's necessary knowledge? As you know, necessary knowledge is knowledge that is born in you without the need to think. Without need to think and deduce, we find within ourselves the sure knowledge of the existence of Mecca or Baghdad. Sure knowledge, and like you know, this word sure here is just for emphasis, because knowledge is as clear for you, is 100% correct, according to what we're saying here, according to our definitions here, according to our topic. Knowledge is 100% correct. Your perception that complies with reality, without any room for error, without any room for error. So there's not really a necessity to put the word sure here. It's enough just to say we find within ourselves the knowledge of the existence of Mecca or Baghdad. But just for emphasis, this is here. We find within ourselves the sure knowledge of the existence of Mecca or Baghdad and of Hitler and Napoleon, based on the sheer numbers of reporters whose gathering to conspire would have been a supernatural phenomenon, as we explained already. So if you have any question about that right there, this issue of supernatural phenomenon and all of that, go ahead and ask. But I mentioned it last week and I mentioned it last time. Last week was review and last time was when we were first going over the book. The proof that it indeed promotes necessary knowledge. You missed the last 2 classes? Okay. Wait. So, here, let me repeat. Yeah, no problem. So it says here, we find within ourselves the sure knowledge of the existence of Mecca or Baghdad and of Hitler and Napoleon, based on the sheer numbers of reporters whose gathering to conspire would have been a supernatural phenomenon. So what it means is, we'll take the example of Hitler. What if someone said, what if someone said, Hitler, he's not real. He's like Santa Claus. So if you said that to me, I'd say, Hitler is indeed real. It's not like Santa Claus. The only way Hitler could not be real, could not have really existed, that is if the conspiracy about him was a supernatural phenomenon, Supernatural phenomenon is like when a prophet does a miracle. That's a supernatural phenomenon. Or when a wali does a karama, like the wali, he might walk on water, or he might fly in the air, or something like that, or he might take a few steps, he'll be far, very, very far away in another country. That's supernatural phenomenon. So would anyone agree that Hitler never really existed, and that the news about him was actually a conspiracy, but not a normal conspiracy, but a supernatural phenomenon, one that involved like all the people in the world, all the nations in the world, and some conspiracy that fabricated an entire war, a world war. So nobody would accept that. So what we're saying is Hitler's existence is confirmed by successive mass narration. So that's what. And successive mass narration is guaranteed always 100% of the time to be accurate and true. And the only way something that's a successive mass narration could be false is if there were a supernatural conspiracy about it. Is it clear for you? Well, yeah, I could give any example. Anything that's known by Tawatur, Napoleon, the existence of Baghdad, the existence of Mecca. What if someone said Mecca? That city doesn't exist. That's like Atlantis. That's like the city of Atlantis. It doesn't really exist. So if that's true, if that were true, that Mecca doesn't really exist, then the conspiracy about this place is a supernatural phenomenon. Even people you know are in on it. They came back to you. They said, "Yeah, I went to Hajj," and really they're lying. Is it clear for you? You're welcome. Like, so if someone said George Washington, he doesn't exist. He never existed. Slavery in America? What? That's a fairy tale. So how do we know those things really existed? By successive mass narration. Successive mass narration, which is true 100% of the time. Okay, so successive mass narration is true. Fine. So then there's a question. But how do we know that it promotes knowledge, though? And if we say it promotes knowledge, how do we know that it promotes necessary knowledge? Necessary knowledge, which is knowledge that is born in you without needing to think. The proof that it indeed promotes necessary knowledge is that knowledge is born through this way, through this type of news. For who investigates the issue, as well as for someone who does not investigate the issue. Not only does not investigate, cannot investigate. Knowledge is born even for someone who cannot investigate the issue, like a child or a commoner who is incapable of performing the required investigation. Or the child or the commoner who is incapable of formulating premises and conclusions. Yani the necessary premises and conclusions. Meaning, someone might say, successive mass report, okay, it is 100% true. It is true 100% of the time, fine. And if we are to say that it promotes knowledge, it's only going to be a deduced knowledge, not necessary knowledge. It's going to be a knowledge that requires your thinking and your investigation. Then what disproves that is knowledge born in those who don't know yet how to do such critical thinking that's needed, or who are incapable of performing the required investigation, such as the child or the commoner. So, meaning, in other words, here, despite that they have correct knowledge of the Prophet's existence, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So does the child, that Muslim child, for example, or any child, but let's just say Muslim child who's 5 years old, 6 years old, 7 years old, let's say 7 years old, 8 years old, 9 years old. He's not an investigator. He's not a sleuth. He believes in Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So do we say that this child, he thinks Muhammad existed, and he doesn't really know because he can't do research and he can't do the proper deductions. So he thinks Muhammad existed, and it just so happens that what he thinks complies with reality, but it's not really a knowledge on his part because he couldn't deduce it and he couldn't research it. No, we don't say that. We say this child, since his perception is in tune with reality, then he has knowledge of Prophet Muhammad's existence. He has knowledge of the Kaaba's existence. And he has knowledge of other things, as well as the commoner. The commoner, he knows Prophet Muhammad existed, alayhi salatu wasalam, without being a scholar, without being a detective. So then, how did they get this knowledge if they are not detectives, they are not investigators, and also they are not experts at deduction? They knew it merely because this type of knowledge, merely because this type of news installs knowledge. This type of news installs knowledge without you having to think about it. And so you will know. That's the proof that Tawatur promotes necessary knowledge. They have correct knowledge of the Prophet's existence, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and his performance of miracles. Ibn Hajar said, he said, so if these four conditions are gathered together, four conditions which you're going to mention now, we have them numbered here, as you can see, if you can see my screen. If these four upcoming conditions are gathered together, then knowledge will be born. Yani it will be Mutawatir report, and it will promote knowledge. What are these four conditions? They are, for the big number of reporters, to make it normally impossible for them to have conspired to a lie or to coincidentally agree about it. So that's number one. Normally impossible. If something is normally impossible, that means it will not happen unless it's supernatural. The miracles of prophets are normally impossible. That's why they prove that the one who performs them is a truthful prophet. When a prophet comes to a person and he says, I am a prophet, and then the person says, prove it. So then the prophet does a miracle. His stick turns into a giant dragon, or he points at the moon and it splits into two pieces, or anything like this. Why does that prove he's really a prophet? Because he just did something that's normally impossible. There's no way you can achieve this by any normal means. So then, since it's normally impossible, but it did happen, that means it's supernatural. So likewise, one of the conditions of Tawatur is for the big number of reporters to make it normally impossible for them to have conspired to a lie or to have coincidentally agreed about a lie, a falsehood. Or else if it really happened, yani, if they really did that, that was a supernatural phenomenon. Two, that they narrated that from their likes, from the beginning until the end. So the first group, which is the group that witnessed the event, are so numerous that it's normally impossible that they could have conspired to a lie. And then they pass that on. This is word of mouth. They pass that on to the next generation. And this next generation is as large as the first or larger. And then it keeps going like that. Then this is successive mass report. So that's why, yani, for example, the case of Hitler, so many people witnessed him and the events surrounding him, which is World War II. But if somebody told you World War II, that's a fairy tale. So unless it's not a fairy tale. SubhanAllah. Sometimes on my YouTube feed, I see some videos. Some person says, "Did Muhammad really exist?" or something similar to that. SubhanAllah. The third condition is that the source of what they are reporting was something witnessed. Something witnessed, yani an event, a witnessed event. So when we say witnessed, what does that exclude? What's not witnessed? What's not witnessed is an idea, an idea. So, or a mental proof, a mental argument. That's not an event witnessed. So someone says 2 plus 2 equals 4. I hereby inform you that 2 plus 2 equals 4. And he says to you, and I challenge you to ask anyone in the world and see if you get a different report. So is this Mutawatir? It's not Mutawatir. This is not a Mutawatir news. Because 2 plus 2 being 4 is not an event. An event. An event is like a war. Or something like that, like a person who appeared, like Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Or a place that existed or exists. All of that is an event, or all of those are events. Witnessed event. So the third condition is that the source of what they are reporting is a witnessed event. And the fourth, Ibn Hajar says, and added to that is their news imparting knowledge on who hears it. Their news imparting knowledge on who hears it. How's it going to do that? It's going to do that by a recipient of the news hearing this news again and again and again through so many routes, unlimited routes, until knowledge is born in him or installed in him or imparted in him. Doesn't have to think. It's just that he heard it so much that he knew it was true. Yani, he knew it. But it's so important to know that just because you hear something so much doesn't mean that it's true. Yani, if you take any of these things on their own without all the conditions together, then the news is not tawatur. In order for it to be mutawatir news, all these conditions have to be gathered. That's what he said at first. If these four conditions are gathered together, none of them are missing, or none of them is alone. So what if there's a big number of people reporting something? That's the only attribute of this news. It's not mutawatir, and it still could be false. What if what was being reported was an idea? It's not mutawatir, it could be false. So Ibn Hajar said, and added to that is their news imparting knowledge on who hears it. He said, this is the success of mass narration, and whatever is devoid of imparting knowledge is merely a famous report. Meaning anything that is reported on a large scale but is devoid of imparting knowledge is merely a famous report. Therefore, every successive mass narrated report is a famous report, but not vice versa. Not vice versa. Not every famous report is a successive mass narrated report. And then Ibn Hajar says, and it could be said that if these four conditions are present, then it dictates imparting knowledge, and that is the case usually. However, the installation of knowledge from such reports could miss some individuals for some reason or another. This means that it is possible that something that truly is successive mass narration does not install knowledge on an individual level for someone, for some loner here or there. Why would it not install knowledge in this individual? Because he hasn't heard it enough. Like someone who doesn't know that Muhammad performed miracles, so he wouldn't believe it. And then if you told him, he still might not believe it. And then if three people told him, maybe he still won't believe it. And in reality, Prophet Muhammad's performance of miracles in general is a successive mass report. Ibn Hajar says, and by this the definition of tawatur has become clear. Sallallahu alayhi wasallam. What's not knowledge, though, by the way? Let me read this paragraph first, then I'll say what I was going to say. Thus, if the original source were not a witnessed event, like dinosaurs, so you never witnessed a dinosaur, not a single one of us did, or the material of stars. Don't contemporary scientists claim to know what stars are made of? What's their center? What's the core of a star? They say, oh, it's a gas, and whatever else they might say. Or rotation and revolution. Rotation is, they claim, the Earth spinning on its own axis. No one ever witnessed this. This is not a witnessed event. Rather, they need to teach it to the school children from the time they're small, so that it will be, so they will be indoctrinated with it and grow up believing it. Otherwise, there's no witnessing for it. And revolution, which is, they claim, the Earth going around the sun. Rotation and revolution. Not witnessed by anyone. Or gravity. Gravity is not witnessed by anyone. Because seeing something fall down is not witnessing gravity. Because gravity is some force that's outside of the body, supposedly. Gravity is supposedly some force that's outside of the body that brings the body down, pulls the body down. No one ever witnessed this force. What we witnessed is bodies falling. And then someone said, why do these bodies fall? What is it outside of these bodies that make them fall? I have an idea. I'm going to call it gravity. So gravity is not known by Tawatur. Gravity is a theory until today. And black holes, or evolution, or Big Bang, or human eggs, what's that? That's something that they saw under the microscope, and then they gave it a designation. They said, these are eggs. So humans don't have eggs, though. You know something interesting? The Arabs said, like the old ones, the old Arabs, they said, things that lay eggs, they don't have ears on the outside of their heads. Subhanallah wa bihamdi. So none of this is witnessed event. But why is this put here? Why are all these examples given here? Because all these examples are things, are examples of things that are deemed correct. Yeah, in the mainstream, let's say. For the most part, nobody would deny it. But if you take these religious fundamentals here, then you could become skeptical. Then you would really have grounds to be skeptical. And then somebody would think that you're an ignoramus for being skeptical about these things. And then you talk to that person from these fundamentals, not from their fundamentals. A lot of Muslims, they say, I want to learn about what the kuffar say so I can refute them in their own method. I suggest don't refute them in their own method. Just refute them with Islamic method. If any of you have any question about any of these things here, feel free. Yani, I'm not saying this to you so you can just listen to me and then don't think about what I'm saying to you.
Sheikh, I have a question.
Yes,
Of the four evidences that you gave us, number three, when you said the source of which they are reporting is witnessed
yes,
event and not an idea,
yeah.
could you just Make mention about the idea again. The
Yeah, an
meaning of
example of an idea is like, yeah, idea means something mental, not an actual event that happened and people witnessed it. When we say witness, means you saw it or you heard it. That's what's meant here. You saw it, it was seen or heard. That's witnessed.
idea.
So
Yeah.
idea is not something seen or heard, a mere idea, even if it's true. Like if someone says 2 plus 2 equals 4. Okay, that's true. And everyone in the world's going to agree. So is the fact that everyone in the world will agree that 2 plus 2 equals 4, does that make this news, the news, when someone says, I report to you that 2 plus 2 equals 4, so it's a report, does that make
Mm.
that successive mass report? No. Somebody might say, but everybody will say it. Everyone in the world will agree. So why isn't it a successive mass report? The answer is that it's not a successive mass report because it's not a witnessed event. Being a witnessed event is a condition. Is that clear?
Yes, it is. I have another question.
Yes.
The big number of reporters to tell a lie and you're supposed to profit. This is normally impossible and to conspire to a lie or to agree. Could you finish that? These big number of reporters, in reference to this is normally impossible to conspire to a lie or agree
Or to agree to it.
to
To
it.
agree to a lie.
Okay.
Yeah. To such a lie
Such
or
a lie.
falsehood.
A falsehood.
Yeah.
Okay.
For the big number to make it normally impossible for such a big number of reporters, that number itself makes it normally impossible for these reporters to have conspired to a lie or coincidentally agree about it also. What if they were all mistaken, Yani, if it's a lie? And so if it's 1,000 people and they were all mistaken about something and they happen to all make the same mistake, that's normally impossible too. That's clear?
Yes, you said coincidentally agree to it.
Yeah, they just coincidentally all made the same mistake. 1,000 people. Like some people said, for example, there was a king in England named Henry, King Henry. Okay, so we would say, well, it's impossible for all the people to have conspired to a lie. What if someone said, okay, they didn't conspire to a lie, but maybe they just all happened to make the same mistake and think there was a king in England named Henry?
Th- Is this the part where it doesn't sound right? Is that part what you just said?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
because you're not going to accept that. If you told someone
No.
about anyone very famous, like
Fire.
very
Yes.
known, like George Washington or Abraham Lincoln, and then someone told you Abraham Lincoln, nah, he didn't really exist. What happened was that there was just millions of people who coincidentally made a mistake about someone, and they called him Abraham Lincoln, and they said he did this and this, he lived at this time and in this place, and he did this and that. They all just happened to make the same mistake.
Mm,
So that's unacceptable.
yes. Barakallahu bikum. You answered my questions. Thank you.
So if the original source were not a witnessed event, like dinosaurs, or the material of stars, or rotation and revolution, or gravity, or black holes, or evolution, or Big Bang, or human eggs, it, Yani, the human eggs thing, I told you, some people under a microscope they saw something and gave it a designation. They called it eggs. Even those seers, those people who saw that, they are not a a number of people that constitute Tawatur. or if the original reporters were not as many as described. The big number of conveyors came later. Yani, uh, if something happened and at the first there were only a few reporters about it, but then it became famous and it spread. That's not tawatur either. Like the news of the slaying of Jesus. That didn't start off as tawatur. Yani, most of the people in the world today probably think Jesus was slain, was killed. We Muslims, we say he was not killed and he was not crucified. But if you bring all the Christians and you bring all the Jews and you bring all the non-Muslims who are not Christians or Jews, maybe all of them or most of them today would say Jesus was killed. So someone would say, so therefore, isn't that successive mass report? The answer is no, it's not, because it didn't start off like that. That's the first thing Ibn Hajar said there. He said, or the second thing, that they narrated that from their likes, from beginning until the end. In the case of Jesus, alayhi salatu wasalam, or whoever was killed upon that pole, it didn't start off as successive mass report. It started off as rumor, merely. And they themselves, the people involved in the story, weren't sure that they killed Jesus. But they just said that they did, but they weren't sure that they did. And the people at that time, they weren't meticulous investigators. They were not meticulous investigators. The scholars said the people from the nations of Jesus and Moses are not like the scholars of the nation of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in terms of accuracy, in terms of verifying information. Or the Jewish claim that Moses sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that his revealed law would never be abrogated. That's not tawatur. Such news would not promote knowledge. In fact, such news could not escape the clutches of ignorance, doubt, and skepticism. And what else? You know what's knowledge to a lot of kuffar? Uh, Statistics. Especially people who are involved in politics. So they follow the polls. They say 21% of Americans say Allah knows where they got these numbers from. Yani, maybe one time in my whole life I got a question for a poll. And it just came to my phone randomly. I don't even know who sent it. And I didn't respond to it also. So how they know 21% of Americans, 50% of Americans believe this or like this? Allahu Alam. And sometimes they even say things that are, if you think about them, they are fallacious. Like, for example, what's his name? Joe Biden. He said, illegal border crossings are down 40%. 40% compared to what? So just saying it like that, that's really because he believes people are stupid. Down 40% sounds good. 40% of what? Yeah, propaganda. Hakada. Subhanallah, yani, you will see when they get together to debate, or like when they have some news panels and there's so-called pundits are talking. What are they doing? They're just throwing what they call facts back and forth to each other, which are just statistics. No, 40%. No, 30%. No, 20%. Subhanallah wa bihamdi. And sometimes they debunk those things. So one of them would say, 40% of the people say such and such. Then another one would come and say, that 40%, that was taken from such and such poll. And that poll was debunked by another poll. Or that poll is just one poll, but then there's another poll. So, which they don't have any knowledge here. They have a lot of speculation. So the other type of accurate news that promotes knowledge is news from a prophet. This means hearing directly without an intermediary from a prophet. And prophets perform miracles. The issue of miracles is important here because the miracle is what proves he's a prophet in the first place. Information conveyed by an impeccable one promotes definite knowledge. And you know very well now, this word definite is only for emphasis. Information conveyed by an impeccable one promotes knowledge. Like successive mass narration, it promotes knowledge. However, it's not necessary knowledge, it's inferred knowledge, deduced knowledge. One seeks evidence to verify it, and the evidence in this case will be a miracle. So, knowing how to prove the miracles of Prophet Muhammad is important. And that goes back to Tawatur, knowing about Tawatur. So, don't forget, the issue of Tawatur, successive mass report, is an extremely important religious topic. An extremely important religious topic. It's not just an interesting detail in the religion. It is a pivotal and fundamental important issue. However, this definitive knowledge happens to who heard directly from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and witnessed his miracles. As for having an intermediary between oneself and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, definitive knowledge does not take place, but by a tawatur report. Definitive knowledge won't take place except by a tawatur report. Or yani, a tawatur report like the Quran. Except the case of a supreme researcher dealing with a report with many routes. Let me read that again. As for having an intermediary between oneself and the Prophet, like ourselves, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, definitive knowledge does not take place. Meaning, if someone said to us, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said such and such, this doesn't make knowledge be born in us. We need to check it. Definitive knowledge does not take place but by a tawatur report. If it's a tawatur report, then we have definitive knowledge like the Quran. We have no doubt that the Quran that we have is the verbatim, word for word document transmitted by Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Except the case of a supreme researcher dealing with a report with many routes, like a hafiz of hadith who has a report with many routes. Because of his expertise, he could have knowledge, although that's less than tawatur. Wallahu alam. So then we finish that. And then next week, if Allah enables us, then we'll talk about the third thing that causes knowledge out of the three, which is the mind. Do you have any question that you want to ask?
I have a question.
Yes.
Could you please repeat the definitions of tawatur and mutawatir? Because I missed that at the beginning.
Yeah. The tawatur is the attribute of the news. It's an attribute. Tawatur is an attribute. Mutawatir is any news that has such an attribute. So it's like if you were to say, knowledge is an attribute. Knowledgeable is how you describe someone who has such an attribute. Or you say, weakness, that's an attribute. And anyone who has the attribute of weakness is described as weak. Weak is the descriptive name. So tawatur, that's the attribute. Tawatur, that's the attribute of some news. So when news has this attribute, it's described as mutawatir. Is that what you were looking for?
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. طيب سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك